Hello and welcome back to the Horror Academic, and this month I'm going to go a little newer than usual, only a few years old. And while the rest of the world is debating how Halloween ends, I thought this month we'd talk about Halloween Kills. 2021's Halloween Kills is definitely one of those divisive films that splits fans down the middle, much like we're seeing with Halloween Ends. Halloween Kills definitely does this too. And not unlike Halloween 2018, there's a lot of controversy about how we're picking things up. So, where 2018 makes this bold decision that it's a direct sequel to Halloween 78, there's this sense that we're dropping a lot of what we had all assumed was canon. Kills kind of like does the same thing Halloween 2 does in a weird way. So, Halloween 2 from, 1981. So, it does something which was kind of strange at the time, I guess, which is picks up minutes after this one stops. So, 78 happens, Laurie Strode rushed to the hospital, and this pretty much takes up with what happens after the shape goes missing, after Laurie gets to the hospital, and him trying to track her down. So the filmmakers for the 2018 series decided that none of this happened, even though John Carpenter and Deborah Hill worked on this film. That's why it's kind of considered a bold choice. Had it been any other sequel to, how many, like, the Terminator films, they all decided, like, it's Terminator, Terminator 2, and then nothing in the middle counts. Our movie's the next movie. We keep seeing that happen. It's not uncommon. There's a lot of this kind of rearranging or removing things from canon. But that's why I feel it's a strange move for them to decide that 2 doesn't count, because 2 was still by the people who made part 1. So that was surprising. I will definitely say that was surprising. When you walk into Kills, there's a lot of takes on what happens in 2. So, where Halloween 2018 says none of that happened, doesn't matter what happened to Laurie when she got to the hospital, we're not going to say that that's what happened with the shape. We're not going to count that body count. Those people didn't die that night. What I found interesting, though, was the nods to the things that happened in this film. And it was this kind of, yeah, we know what you think happened in part 2, but we're going to tell you why that didn't happen. And that's what I thought was interesting. One of the things, I'll say, that I thought was interesting about Kills. There's this whole thing where Laurie has to come to grips with the fact that Michael's not searching for her. And where part 2 is all about that, part 2 is the continuation of Michael trying to find Laurie. In Kills, it's Michael didn't just inflict all of his damage on Laurie and her friends, he inflicted it on this town. And he wasn't going to her, he was going home. And that we've always said that. Michael goes home, the shape goes home, on Halloween he goes home. But why, right? So there's a few kind of themes, repeated themes in this of where Michael's going. He's going home because they remark several times, particularly Frank, the policeman, he talks about how, Officer Hawkins, he talks about how Michael goes to stand in the window of his sister's bedroom. And the assumption is he's looking out on the town of Haddonfield. But there's also this new kind of revelation that happens within the context of the present day of this story that's saying, or is he looking at his own reflection? Does he keep going to that mirror, that window, to see a mirror of himself? And they do a great job in Kills of creating a timeline that exists between here and here. There's this really good overlap of what really happened if we're saying this didn't happen. It picks up where 2018 doesn't touch it too much. Kills is now saying, what happened in that gap? What happened between all the horrible things that happened on that night, that Halloween night in '78, and Michael going to the institution. We have reenactments. Like they reset, they recreate, I should say. There's some real amazing work here, and my initial assumption is it was digital, but watching the extras on the disc, I learned that the production designer, the costume designer, and the director of photography all worked together closely to recreate the Haddonfield of 1978, that street, Michael's house, and kind of some of the surrounding areas. And where the assumption is, well, they're just going to digitally fix an actual place, the director talks about how, you know, I didn't want to have to inflict a real town with that much violence being shot, you know, like recording that much violence all night long. So let's use a massive soundstage. And they had the budget to do it, so go for it. Awesome. We have these really great scenes that are picking up and seeing what happened to other people after Laurie is kind of picked up by the cops and brought by ambulance to the hospital. So we see Hawkins is now, where Hawkins was not a character that is, if he is, it's not a main character in '78. We're kind of inserting him into that story and giving his history now. Him being one of the guys who is one of the young cops who's tracking Michael on his trip back home after taking out Laurie's friends when he gets up off the ground. You have a great moment of, you know, a return of Dr. Loomis for a minute. And again, I thought it was digital, but they said they just happened to have somebody working on set who looked a lot like Donald Pleasence, a little makeup, and there you go. Someone dubs the voice with that accent, and, you know, that's great. So that really kind of makes it feel like they did just lift these scenes out of kind of B-roll that ended up on the cutting room floor from the original. Hats off to them for that. I love that. So we have this kind of piecing together of a new timeline, which fills in some of the gaps that 2018 has. And I love 2018. I think it's a really effective film. But there's a big difference between 2018 and Kills. It's not just the next chapter in Laurie's story. 2018 is what happens to one woman who had a traumatic experience 40 years ago and how it affects her life. And, importantly, how it affects the other women in her life. How it affects her daughter, how it affects her granddaughter, and how it looms over their lives. That is exactly the story of 2018, with adding Michael coming back and her finally, years of telling her family to be ready, to be prepared, we have to prep for this, and her prepping, it finally comes true. She was right, and here it is. Now, Kills, though, takes an interesting approach to say, where this was kind of a unique stance when this movie comes out, you know, like 40 years later, a woman dealing with the trauma of what happened to her as a teen in a slasher, you know, this says Laurie was the only person who lived in Haddonfield that survived. So Haddonfield, the town, has trauma and how it affects it 40 years later. So now we're reintroduced to characters from this movie all over again. And that's what I really love about Kills. It's saying, well, yes, Laurie survived. Laurie was the final girl. That's amazing. We heard her story. What about the kids she was babysitting? So Tommy and Lindsay come back in this one. What about that nurse that was with Donald Pleasence in the car, transporting Michael when everything went haywire and he escaped? She comes back. You know, what happened to that sheriff who lost his daughter that night and was ineffective in capturing Michael Myers? Well, he comes back, we find out. Even to the point of finding out what happened to Lonnie, that kid who was Tommy's bully, who was harassing him all through the first movie and trying to scare the crap out of him on Halloween night about the Myers house and the boogeyman and everything. We find out what happens to Lonnie. So that's what I love about Kills. It not just bridges what happens after this, it says, well, what happens to everybody else from this movie now? Awesome. I love this concept. I know a lot of people are not crazy about kills, but that's why I love this film. A, it creates a new timeline that makes sense, fills those gaps, and B, now we see not just one woman and her family's trauma 40 years later, but an entire town of survivors and how it affected them. And even the people who weren't survivors, just the people who know the myth or the legend, you know, the urban legend of Michael Myers, the shape, the boogeyman, how's it affecting this town? Let's talk a little bit about the people who made this movie. So it's a lot of the same people from this one, right? So we're bringing over our director and co-writers and producers, special effects artists, the music. Most of this stuff is the same. We have a new name added to the mix. So let's look real quick. Director is David Gordon Green. So David Gordon Green, like I said, he made Halloween 1, or 2018. So his big hit before he started jumping into horror was Pineapple Express. Comedy, stoner comedy. Greer, now that he's Mr. Horror, is on board to make a Exorcist remake. Good luck, because that's a real tough property to touch. And a Hellraiser series, so not related as far as I know to the Hellraiser movie that just came out on Hulu. So that's what Greer's up to. His co-writer and kind of like conspirator in all of this is Danny McBride, who's known as a comedic actor, obviously. His acting movies, Pineapple Express, there you go. Tropic Thunder, This Is the End, The Foot Fist Way, you know, he's got an itch. But he was also in Alien Covenant. So there's a little genre crossover there. But he's definitely on board and part of this process again still. And in the third film, both of them together again. I don't believe this other writer was part of the first film. This is Scott Teems. Okay, it was a different third writer. It was Jeff Fradley on the first one. So, different co-writer, I guess you could say. He is the guy who also wrote the recent Firestarter remake, Insidious, Fear of the Dark, and also wrote the story for this Exorcist remake that Greer's working on. So, you got that same crew of people, essentially. We have on effects Christopher Nelson again, who is really diving in on bringing back the kind of physical, you know, real effects on these pictures, prosthetics. Producers, again, include Jason Blum, so this is again a Blumhouse production, and Ryan Turek, who seems to be kind of like the leader of the producers, who is diehard fan of the Halloween series as well. And of course, this film, like the first one, has a bunch of executive producers and other producers, including John Carpenter and Jamie Lee Curtis again, and of course Greer and McBride. So you have essentially the same people behind the camera when it comes to the music. So we all know that the score for 2018 was done by Carpenter, his son, and Ray Davies' son, who he has been working with on all of his Lost themes, albums, and those tours that they've done. So they have essentially played off of what they did here to make a kind of like addendum, additional music that becomes Kill's score, which is still a lot of the same basics of the 2018 score, with some new additions that I really liked. These two scores together, I think, are excellent. One quick note. At some point, the credit music, I believe, becomes Hunter's Moon by Ghost, who released that as a single for Halloween Kills when it came out. I think that's the only place it comes into play in that. So we have all the guys behind the scenes, the people making the music. This is why it all works, because they're all very invested in this concept of continuing the 78 story. A lot of diehard Halloween fans in this crew. So we've talked about who's behind the camera, so let's talk a little bit about who's in front of the camera. So direct sequel means we definitely, since we're picking up minutes later, we have the kind of surviving cast from the first half coming back. Jamie Lee Curtis, obviously back as Laurie. James U. Courtney, again, as Michael Myers. Also, of course, some cameo moments where Nick Castle of the original is back as Myers. Judy Greer, again, playing Karen, Laurie's daughter. What was hitting me on this rewatch was she's been the mom, like a bad mom, in a lot of movies lately. She was the mom in the Jurassic World films. She was the mom in Ant-Man, I believe. One of those, she was also named Karen, so that's a statement. But I was trying to figure out where did I know her from before she started playing all these moms. And I looked it up, and she was Fern in Jawbreaker. So I know that's a little horror adjacent, a bit more of a comedy, but made me feel better that I knew why I knew her so well. So Jawbreaker. We also have her daughter back again, Allison, played by Andy Michak, not sure. And I mentioned Deputy Hawkins. Frank is back, played by Will Patton, who another one that I know we talked about when I covered 2018, but I wanted to check again, why did I know him? And I forgot he was one of the main characters in the series Falling Skies. Sci-fi take on kind of The Walking Dead, if you ask me. So that was neat. Who else is back? We also have Allison's boyfriend. They list him as her ex. I don't know if they even had time to break up. So that's Dylan Arnold. And then, like I said, we have this kind of returning cast of sorts from 78. Let's go over who's the same for real. We have, like I said, we had the nurse who was with Donald Pleasance in that first scene with Michael. That's Nancy Stevens playing Marion Chambers, who... This is going to be part of the scenario here is you make a Carpenter Hill film and you're in a bunch of Carpenter Hill films. So she was also in Halloween 2, Escape from New York, and even came back for Halloween H2O. I didn't remember that, so I'm going to have to look that up. Kyle Richards plays Lindsay Wallace, who was, Lindsay was the little girl that Laurie was taking care of that night. So Kyle Richards had also been in Tobe Hooper's Eaten Alive, which I was surprised. I did not realize she was in that. She was in The Car, Watch Her in the Woods. So she had a couple other horror things before she ends up in more mainstream television, soap operas, that kind of thing. And of course, another recurring favorite of John Carpenter is Charles Cyphers, who was Sheriff Brackett back then. Now he is security night guard at the Memorial Hospital. He was also in Escape from New York. He was also in, I believe he was also in Halloween 2. Oh, he was also in The Fog and Assault on Precinct 13. So Carpenter's like real first kind of solo outing. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so then you have the characters who are supposed to be returning from 78 but are now played by different people. Tommy Doyle is kind of the big one, and he's played by Anthony Michael Hall. Anthony Michael Hall, okay, he's kind of like Jamie Lee Curtis. So many movies, it's hard to list. Let's say he's part of that kind of like Brat Pack of 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird Science. So he's got a lot of 80s cred. So that does, as the director stated in kind of one of the extras, is he feels like he's part of the kind of nature of that time. So it made sense. As far as his horror stuff, well, you gotta remember that he was in Edward Scissorhands, Tim Burton's film, of course. But then he's also in The Dead Zone, the TV series based on the Stephen King book. I believe that's kind of like 2000s-ish, so we'll count that. And then Lonnie, who was Tommy's bully, Lonnie Elam, is played by Robert Longstreet, who was also in Dr. Sleep, Haunting of Hill House, the recent series Midnight Mass. So he's got a lot of stuff. Those were kind of what I kind of gleaned that were the kind of his horror cred. Okay, so other characters who are new that are just pretty much brought in to be victims in this film. We have Carmela McNeil as Vanessa and her husband Marcus, played by Michael Smallwood. What I like about this is you get a little taste of them in the background of 2018. They're the couple getting ready to get into their car to go to a Halloween party that are kind of like the neighbors of the kid that is getting babysat. So their costumes are a doctor and a nurse, which is the switch of what they really are. She's playing a nurse, but she's really a doctor, and vice versa. So their costumes really stick out. So it was neat to see them as part of this follow-up as well. So that was kind of cool to have a slight recurrence there. And some of the best characters in this were there's a couple who have bought the Myers house and are very aware that it's the Myers house and are kind of having some spooky fun with it. But that's Big John and Little John. Big John played by Scott MacArthur, and Little John, Michael McDonald. Love their characters. That's a great case of, these are characters who are on screen for maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. They have a long drawn out kind of scenario when Michael comes into their home. But you learn so much about them that you feel like you know them very well by the time they do die. So I love when you can build a character up that well in such a short time. So that was great. And also there's the kind of neighbors to Laurie's compound that we see kind of first, which is Phil and Sandra. Phil played by Lenny Clark, and Sandra's Diva Tyler. So love their little characters too. Again, you're getting this feel like this is Haddonfield is a real town with lots of different types of people, and you know, we're getting these little tastes of what's in all these households, and everyone knows, you know, like I said, Big John and Little John are very aware that they bought the Myers house. Sandra and her husband Phil are very aware that the local crazy Laurie is down the street from them. They comment on how she, you know, firing guns all hours, her house is on fire, you know, it's par for the course because she's the local weirdo now. So I love this kind of building of a town that I think is kind of reflective of how the first film does so well. And if you go back to the episode that I did with my friend Melissa on Halloween 78, we talk a lot about how Deborah Hill does a lot of work to make the girls feel real and their high school experience very lived in. So I think we're seeing this kind of recurring again. It's really easy in slashers to make these cardboard cutout folks that we are just going to see long enough to get killed. I like that we're getting a flavor of who they really are and how, you know, they know they live in a town with a crazy history. So that's why I think even the new victims have a lot to say in this. So I appreciate all of that. So let's go back to some of the kind of themes and overview things about this film in particular, Kills. Like I said, I love that it picks up right after 2018 happens. And like I was saying before, there's that nod of rejection of this way versus this way. So, and to be clear, when I say that this was considered canon because it's made by the people who made the original, that's also knowing that it is produced by Carpenter and Hill. This film, of course, is not directed by Carpenter. Directed by Rick Rosenthal. Written and produced by, then, Carpenter and Hill. So when I say that it's from the same people, I don't mean Carpenter directly directed this one, but the note of this film is very much, you know, he's coming to her. What Kills does differently is Michael's not trying to track down Laurie in the hospital. And that's such a departure that I like that it puts you in the hospital so you understand that that's not going to happen. This scenario doesn't really have to happen. We're in a new setting, a new world, and in that world, remember, Michael never did follow her to the hospital. So I think it's kind of a nod and then an understanding of explaining to the audience why we're still here. It also puts Laurie out of commission, and Frank. By having Laurie and Officer Hawkins next to each other in the emergency room kind of bed situation, we know that they can't take the fight right now, you know? It's kind of passed down. In some ways, that means it's passed down to Laurie's family, and we see that with Karen finally understanding all these years of what her mom was trying to teach her, and then Allison pretty much taking up the mantle of no, I don't want to just stay here. I want to do something about this. So she's a very proactive character. And also her boyfriend, Lonnie's son, they work together in that respect. And then the other people that we're handing the torch over to, and this maybe isn't necessarily by Laurie's design, whereas she may have trained her family, it's the children that she was taking care of then. When Tommy Doyle tracks her down, you know, he tells her, "You protected me 40 years ago. It's my turn to protect you now." And that's important to see really why he feels he needs to be kind of like the leader of this. So let's talk about that, though. He essentially forms a militia. He turns the town into a mob. He riles everyone up as soon as they know what happened to Laurie, and that there's people dead, that there's the whole the escapees from the transport that went bad. All of this is finally making it to the news cycle. And they're, they're all celebrating their Halloween night, another night of surviving, what the trauma they had as children. And they see this on the news, and they realize this is something we have to do now. We have to take this up because Laurie can't. So that, I understand that's where they're coming from. But at the same time, he instantly pushes it towards mob rules violence in a way that is the opposite in some ways of how Laurie was dealing with it. Laurie was dealing with this. This is personal. I have to deal with this. I have to make sure that this stops here. Tommy's like, I have to get the town to fight back against our boogeyman. And that all makes sense, and I understand it. And at the point that he pushes it so far that they're openly going against the police, they're openly proclaiming violence, they're going to kill someone, is their goal. It takes on a whole nother beast, and it gets ugly. And I think that's part of the point here. It was hard watching that in the theater and not, thinking about all of the mob mentality in general going on in the world right now. Our country alone, we're so mucked down in all of the politics of our time. After the past few years of protest in the streets, the movements that literally had to take to the streets to be heard, there is a hint of that. But there's also, to me, what I see is this easily tempted to go to violence, easily tempted to believe what might not be the truth, you're not sure is the truth. And that, more to me, sums up our reality in some ways in recent times. I see a lot of, without getting political, I just want to say that I see a lot of what's going on in America in these sequences. The whole chanting, "Evil dies tonight," the whole, over the topness of just swarming a hospital. It was filmed in 2019. So know that it can't be directly talking about certain things, but it's hard to not see them today, is what I'm going to say. So, I think we see a lot of things here. We see Tommy has good intent, but takes it too far. We see a little bit of information getting spread all out of proportion. The wrong person is assumed to be Michael. It's the other escaped convict crazy guy, and they chase him down and essentially kill him without killing him. He's so scared of them he suicides. That's pushing things further than you mean to, because they don't start to realize, oh, we were wrong, until it's too late. Even though people are trying to stop them to tell them you're wrong, that's not him. Things easily get out of hand in these kind of situations, right? But you also see not just Tommy, but you see other people get swept up into this, like Allison and her boyfriend, who also seem to be, they seem to mean well. I think it's trying to say even someone who means well can get swept up in this kind of panic. Without them honing in on specific things going on in society, I think they accidentally did. Be it was just in the air when they were making these sequences. And the actors talk about being there, and it's like one thing to read it on the page, but to actually do it and have that many extras and these situations and the chanting and the screaming and the yelling and the, weapons in their hand, it got scary. And that's a little closer to reality than I think they meant for it to be. But it's effective, and one of the things I think makes this movie work that I think a lot of people didn't like about it. So, all that to say, it was a strange way to go. This was not expected, but in a movie that's about a town dealing with their own boogeyman, this was a way it could go. So, I appreciate that. So evil dies tonight. Mob mentality take over. In an effort to take on Laurie's burden as protector, Tommy tries to rally the town into a militia, takes over from the cops, leads to mass hysteria and violence and a death. To me, this is an allegory of the Trump era mentality. Try to solve problems with half-truths, lack of reason, and violence. So this going off half-cocked, Okay, so we have Tommy and Lonnie kind of zeroing in on Michael, and at this point, Allison and Dylan are there as well. While Tommy goes one way with the mob at the hospital, Lonnie takes the kids and they go to Michael's home. Because he realizes that's the trajectory. He's trying to get home again. So what's interesting here is that where the last film, the showdown, was all about Laurie and the Shape, then slowly her child and her child's child become part of that fight. Without Laurie there, the big showdown this time is Allison and Karen taking over. This is their fight now. Lonnie and Dylan, they can't do it. These two women have to take over with their mother, grandmother left off the fight. That's pretty impactful. I appreciate that in that kind of way the story goes. What's interesting to me about Karen's evolution as a character from the last film to this film, in the last film, she's essentially an antagonist. She's telling Laurie the whole time, "You're wrong, Mom. You need help. This is not happening. It's in your head. I won't listen to this." She doesn't listen to it till literally the end of the film. So now she has to become the protagonist in her mother's wake. And it's that juxtaposition moves her character so forward, because now it's not just fighting for her mother and her child, but she lost her husband in the last film, and that's a whole nother layer of grief that she didn't expect to come out of this. So that I thought was pretty strong. And in the end, where she thinks she's dealt the blow, and then it turns, she takes the mask and he gets up again, of course, because that's what he does. Her solution is to lure him and bring him to that mob and let them deal with it at this point. And she, in her way, is helping that and is part of that at this point. So you have right front and center in that circle that instantly engulfs him, you have Brackett, you have Tommy, and you have Karen. So that's the mainstays right there. That's who's left in this fight. When the mob circles in and then attacks, everyone joins in. In the end, even though this seems like this is the way to do it, it isn't. We know it isn't going to succeed. We know that it's pretty impossible for this to succeed, because it's just, yeah, it's a constant onslaught, But all of these methods that they've tried have been done to him before, and he's gotten up from all of them. So, in the end, of course, Michael turns the tide and kills everyone. But that's what we expect, right? The irony of all of it is that while the mob is doing what they think will take on the brunt, which will be the solution, at the same time you hear the voiceover and clips of Laurie and Frank talking about all the things that they've learned since that time 40 years ago about what Michael really is and how you can't so easily kill him because he's no longer human. So as they're coming to that realization together that he is transformed into something else, the mob is learning the hard way the same lesson. So it all kind of comes together at that point. And again, we have this ongoing theory: is Michael drawn to look out this window to see the town or to see his reflection? And is it the same? I mean, I think it all pulls together well. Another thing I noticed about this film between the two is, from my count, the 2018 has 14 kills. While looking it up, it's listed as 18 kills. There's some off-screen kills, I guess, that I did not count. Halloween Kills, if you go by the official count that one of the extras has that literally shows you every death, and I think it's very intentionally, ends at 31. There's some lists online that say like 34 or something like that, but that's a significant jump in deaths from 18 to 31 alone. And then all of this is to say that in the first film, they're saying the mythos of it is that really 3 people died that night. Michael Myers killed 3 people, plus you gotta imagine that, you know, his sister from the period before that. So Myers only has 4 kills in this. Then it jumps again. It almost was starting to get to be too many kills. I don't know. It's a wishy-washy one. It's a slasher. It's supposed to have a lot of kills. And of course, you know, you're going to go from this, you got to go even bigger. So, you know, it has to be bigger. Just makes me wonder what it's going to be for Halloween Ends, right? Which I'm sure most of you have found out. I am going to find out soon. So, no spoilers. As far as everything else, obviously this is the only edition of the movie I have. It is the extended cut edition. With the alternate ending, a couple of deleted scenes, a fun gag reel, and quite a few featurettes about the making of the film. And what I really got from those is you could tell that there's this love of the franchise, and as far as the Green and McBride and the producers, you know, they all have this kind of love for it. And in a way, there's this kind of, from Jamie Lee Curtis's segments, you get this idea that she's so happy to be taking it to another place and to be pushing the boundaries of this story. And then where, you know, being a sequel to this film, it could have gone one way, but the fact that they chose to take it a totally different way, she really appreciates that. And I'm as a producer on the film, I know that that's important to her as well. So, these are great extras on here. Again, they're the press junket-y, shot on set, you know, type of thing that, you know, these featurettes, I think altogether probably are about between a half hour and an hour worth of footage, maybe about 45 minutes, I'll say, that were also probably culled for the short clips that were put in commercials and other things to advertise the film coming out on disc. I'm really happy with this. Seeing it again, so this is only my second viewing of this. I really still appreciate this film, where I know it's divisive. I know there's a lot of people who don't. I see even more of the things that I liked about it on the first viewing in the theater. So definitely happy with this. And like I said, the only other thing that really to say of that is that I'm really happy with the music that's coming out of this trilogy as well. So these are great.
So yeah, well, like I said, so now everyone can see how the story ends in this trilogy.
I just want to take a minute to go back and talk about the middle. And it felt like a middle. That if anything, that's my complaint. It's very reliant on you having just seen the first one, or recently enough to remember what happened that well. And that you can get away with a passing glance on having maybe in the past 10 years seen this one. But I also love how much it really goes into characters that are for the fans. And that's, I love that. I think they're doing a good job, and I'm excited to go see Ends and find out if I love it or hate it. I have a feeling I'm gonna like it after how much I like these two. But we shall see. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in this month to the Horror Academic, and taking a pretty recent stab with me. And I'll see you again next month, and happy Halloween. Bye.